All right. Hello, travelers. I want to welcome you back to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're sharing free live stream discussions with some amazing members of our global education community. And you can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, I am so excited to welcome back Colin Heinrich from Indonesia. Many of you know Colin from his Reach the World Explorer Program expedition to Antarctica earlier this year, and he's back today with some amazing tales from his most recent journey to Indonesia. You can read about Colin's experiences in Antarctica and Indonesia on his expedition homepages, and we'll be sure to share those links in the YouTube chat bar. Also, please use the chat bar to let us know you're here today and share any questions you may have for Colin as we go. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and I'm sure there will be a lot because I'm so excited for today's topic. And that said, let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about orangutans in Indonesia. Welcome, Colin.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction. So like Tim said, my name is Colin, Colin Heinrich. I work for a company called Indonesia. So for those of you who weren't joining me for the Antarctica expedition, Indonesia is a company that helps people plan their travel for when they want to go on vacations. And my job there, I'm called the Global Impact Manager. So what I do is I help to make sure that when people go and travel, they're doing it in a responsible way that helps them make a positive impact on the world and the environment. And so it's really nice that we're doing this conversation on Earth Day because it's a day that's all about making sure that we take care of the world and have it ready for people in your generation to take over soon. So with that in mind, that's kind of why I went to Indonesia in the first place. You don't really know how to travel responsibly unless you go and do some research on it. So what I did was I flew to Indonesia so that I could see what people could do in Indonesia when they want to go there and still have a responsible and entertaining time. And the first part of that was about going to an island called Sumatra. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that you can see some of my pictures and other things that I did while I was in Indonesia. How are we looking, Tim?
Looking great.
Okay, perfect. So Sumatra, here's Indonesia as a whole. It's a big country with something like 7,000 islands. And Sumatra is the really large one over to the west. It's the one that goes mostly north and south. And where I was going in Sumatra was on the very far north of it. And I flew into a place called Medan, and getting there was a really long time. I actually went to Australia first and was in Melbourne for a little bit, and then flew to Singapore and had a 6-hour layover in Singapore. And then I flew another 3 hours to get to Medan. And Medan is in the far north of Sumatra. It's a really small city. And from there, we drove another 3 hours to a place called Bukit Lawang, which is in the middle of the Sumatran rainforest. And that's kind of the gateway to go and see orangutans there. And I wanted to make sure that where we were going was a place that the orangutans are treated well, where the orangutans are allowed to live a natural life, and that the experience you can have there really focuses on making sure that they are protected. Indonesia is a place that has a lot of issues right now, primarily with regards to something called palm oil. If you haven't heard of palm oil before, it's something that goes in your food to make it taste good. And the problem is that when you grow palm oil, you have to cut down the rainforest to do it. And so there's a whole big problem now where they're cutting down a bunch of the orangutans' habitat to make palm oil. And so if you want, there's actually websites that we can share with you on how to find food that doesn't have palm oil in it. And if you find that you're able to avoid it, you're helping the orangutans just by how you eat. But we ended up going out into the jungle and we looked around for some orangutans for a little while. And I'm going to show you a video of the very first orangutan we saw. This was after we'd been walking in the jungle for around 10 minutes only. And we looked up into the trees, and our guide told us to look out for this tiny orange speck. So this orangutan is a little baby. The guide said he was probably no more than a couple of years old. And orangutans stay with their moms for 8 years after they're born. So this one was, when we saw this tiny little guy, we knew that the rest of the family was nearby. And we got really excited to see one because we thought he was so close. He was probably around 50 yards away, like 150 feet. And we were all excited thinking this was as close as we were going to get. But as it turned out, the rest of the family was very charismatic and wanted to hang out too. So the big dad ended up walking right in front of us shortly after. You can just see him going right across. It kind of looks like that video of Bigfoot, if you've seen that. Disappearing into the jungle. Big orangutans can get up to something like 800 pounds if they're the very largest ones. But here's what they look like in up close. And this was the big dad. They called him Casanova because he's actually the father of almost every other orangutan that's in the area. You can see him up close here. So these orangutans are called semi-wild ones. The area that we were in was actually it used to be a rehabilitation center. So when orangutans were found on the black market or being hunted by poachers or injured, they'd be taken to this rehabilitation center, and humans would care for them, feed them, give them medicine, anything that they need to help them feel better. And what that does is ultimately it teaches these orangutans that some humans aren't bad. And as much as they try, it changes the orangutan's behavior a little bit. So a wild orangutan will usually stay in the trees for his entire life. He doesn't even need to come down to drink water. He gets all of the water from the leaves that he eats. But these semi-wild orangutans are used to being on the ground now. And so because orangutans are so smart, they actually teach their babies when they have them that some humans are okay and that the ground is okay to go on. And so some of these orangutans, even though they've never been in human care before, they still act like they've been in the rehabilitation center. And so that's why they're called semi-wild instead of truly wild. But one good thing about this, for me anyway, is that it does teach the orangutans that they can get a little bit closer, and that makes them more curious. And so you get situations like this where the orangutan will climb down and just come to see you right in front. And so you'll be 2 feet away from the orangutan. And they're so incredible. They have such lifelike, I shouldn't say lifelike, so much intelligence behind their eyes and a soul, and you can just feel their emotion when you're looking at them. So this is the cute little baby that came down to hang out with us. And the guides will try to teach these orangutans not to be as friendly with humans because they do need them to try to learn to be wild, but they still get a little bit anxious, and they'll reach their hands out like this to try to get food, and then they get all disappointed when they don't get any. And their moms have taught them to do this, taught them that humans mean food. And so it's a really big challenge to try to teach these orangutans that they just won't get any food. And so that's what you're seeing here, where this baby is just playing around and reaching out for food, and then he doesn't get any, so he just climbs back up a little bit. There's a lot of other animals, though, inside the jungle where the orangutans live. So this is another kind of monkey. This is a short-tailed macaque, and you can see that he's got a short little tail right there. And so walking through the jungle, you see all sorts of animals. You see these big monkeys, you see giant centipedes. We saw ants that were about the size of my thumb, and that was a little bit terrifying and a little bit really cool. You almost had to watch where you were walking because you could just hear them under your foot if you stepped on them. But the highlight was obviously still, of course, the orangutans. And so here's another orangutan. This one was named Jackie, and Jackie was an orangutan that went through the rehabilitation center. And so she's used to humans. She lives on the forest floor sometimes. And there's her little baby with her. She's actually taught the baby some things about humans. So the baby is also learning to be on the floor and say hi to humans up close. And even though they're trying to teach them not to do that, sometimes it's impossible. So sometimes they get really, really anxious and want to hang out with you. But the great thing about seeing them on the forest floor is that you can just see them so much more up close and see how they really do feel like human beings. Jackie had her little baby here and was just doing her chores for the day, building their nest for the night. And the baby was laughing and giggling and climbing all over. And you can just see it in this photo right here, how the baby is just so human-like. I'm sure every single one of you has made an expression like that in your life. Playing on the floor like that. I thought this was just the cutest photo. The baby was just rolling around. I'm sure any of you have baby siblings or cousins and have seen something exactly like this before. Climbing up, even though the baby is only a year or so old, it still is able to climb better than any of us will ever be able to. Swinging around on vines, sticking its tongue out. But the big thing was because they're not afraid of humans, and this is something they're trying to teach them not to do, but it's hard. Sometimes they'll actually just grab you and hold on like they used to do for the people that took care of them in the rehabilitation center. So here's me standing on the side of a trail, and Jackie just grabbed my arm and started pulling me into the forest. And I had to actually hold on to a branch and prevent her from pulling me, and she wouldn't let go. And this is one of the things where it's so tough, because the only way we were able to get her to let go eventually was to throw a pineapple that we had into the forest, and then she went to go get that. So you're not supposed to feed them, but at sometimes it's impossible. And so it's just a really difficult balancing act on teaching them the right behavior and how to act like wild orangutans. But here's just one of my last favorite photos of these orangutans. They're just so human-like and they have families, they have emotions, they have so much intelligence. And I really think it's important that we think about how our actions can affect their lives all the way on the other side of the world.
That's incredible, Colin. Let me just chime in here quick before you move on. I have so many questions, and I want to encourage everybody who's watching online, if you have questions for Colin, please drop them in the chat bar. We'd love to pass them along to Colin. But one of my questions is, most of us are used to seeing animals like orangutans at a zoo or in some sort of captivity. What is it like to be in a forest with really nothing between you and these amazing animals? Is it scary? Is it like exhilarating? Is it a combination of both?
It's just exhilarating. It's so hard to put into words the feeling of seeing these animals in their natural habitat and knowing how much trouble they're in, and that we have the chance to make it better for them. I had before I was with Reach the World, I actually had gone on another trip in Rwanda to see the wild mountain gorillas there. And it's a similar experience where you just see these animals up close and personal, and with as they are. It's hard to really describe, but it's something that I hope everybody's going to get the chance to do in the future.
Very cool. I have so many questions about that. Hopefully we can loop back around after the second part of what you want to show us and get some questions for you.
Mm-hmm. Was that the only question?
Yeah, that's
okay,
it for now. Where'd you go after that?
So after that, I went to Java, and that's the next island down. So you saw Sumatra over on the far west. Just south of that, the long flat island that goes from east to west is Java. And Java doesn't have as much rainforest. Java is where Jakarta is. That's the capital of Indonesia. And so it's very heavily populated. Something like 70% of Indonesia lives on this one island. And just to put that in perspective, there's something like 200 million people in Indonesia. That's almost as many as there are in the United States. And there's far less space in Indonesia than there is in the US. And so Jakarta is really, or Java, I should say, is really more of a cultural island. So when I went here, I wanted to learn more about the people, not just the animals. And so one of the big things that I did was I went to a temple called Borobudur. And Borobudur is the largest Buddhist temple on the planet. And the big thing to do there is to see it in sunrise. And so I'll show it to you here. I did a little time lapse as the sun came up over the temple. It got a little blurry there when I was doing it, but I'll show you some more clear photos. But those are called stupas. They're basically ways for Buddhist people to show their devotion to Buddhism. It's tough to explain, and I'm not an expert on it, so I don't want to try to make anything up. But the most important thing to know about Borobudur is that it has a ton of these stupas. And even though Buddhism as a religion is really about letting go of material attachment to things, they built this temple so grand because it's really a place for people to learn about the history of the Buddha. And so all along the temple, you'll see these engravings on the side of the wall. And each one is in order, and it tells the story of how the Buddha was born and became enlightened and formed this religion. And then on some other tiles, it'll show stories of various past lives of the Buddha. The Buddhists believe in reincarnation. And so some of the stories might be about when the Buddha was in a past life, a rabbit, and they're little fables. I don't know if you've read Aesop's fables or anything. I know those are quite popular in America, but they're quite similar to that. They're just about how it's important to help each other and care about each other and worry more about people than things. So it's a huge temple. It's really beautiful. And it's especially beautiful in this foggy weather. I was there in the rainy season. And even though the sun kind of peeked over there, as you saw in that time-lapse video, we had a big burst of pink as the sun came up, and then it went right back to being foggy. But it was still a super atmospheric visit. From there, we went to a wet market. And these are in the news a lot now because this is, where the coronavirus originated. But these are markets where livestock are brought out to be sold. A lot of Indonesian people do their shopping every single day as opposed to going to the grocery store once a week. So they'll come out here, they'll get what they need for the meals for the day, some chickens. These are called snake fruits. You can't really see it in this photo, but the skin looks exactly like a snake. It looks like a dragon egg almost. So they have all these different kinds of foods that we're just totally unfamiliar with here in America. And every day they come, they buy what they need, and they go and make their food. They live a much simpler life, I would say, than we do here. And it's a hard life in some cases, but also very beautiful. And the weather is just amazing over there. So they have rainstorms like you'd never see over here, just these big sustained thunderstorms. But I was in Borobudur for a little bit, and then we went and saw some rice terraces. So this is how they do all their farming over there. rice is the main thing that Indonesians eat. And the big way that they have to grow it is they carve these platforms out of the side of a mountain, and then they plant the rice in these what are called rice paddies. And sometimes the people that own these paddies live miles and miles away, and every single day they have to walk all that way uphill to get to their paddies to tend to the rice, and then walk all the way home. So it can be a very labor intensive job for not a lot of money, but it creates these really beautiful landscapes like this. And then I had to come home. So I left on March 2nd, and on March 11th, I went and saw Bora Bajor. And that day, they declared a state of emergency. And even though I was meant to be traveling for another week, I was meant to go see another island called Bali that you may have heard of. I was meant to go see an island called Sumba. They started canceling flights, and we started becoming worried about being able to get home in time. So we decided to cut our flight short and come home. And this was a lot harder than you might think it would be. We had to be on the phone with our airlines for about 8 hours before we could get our flights changed. And we had to spend a bunch more money. And eventually we got home, and the airports were a little bit crazy. They were simultaneously very empty, but with long lines where the lines would form, because they wanted to be so careful about anybody with the COVID-19 coming into the country. And so you would just see everybody with the face masks on. I'm sure what you've seen now in your own homes, but it was a very surreal experience. And so we were very disappointed to leave early, but one really cool thing that we got to see was, as we took off, we saw all of these volcanoes, and we hadn't noticed these before because either there was too many clouds or the weather wasn't right. But Indonesia is on what's called the Ring of Fire, and it's a place where the tectonic plates that maybe you've learned about in school at this point, depending on how old you are, butt up together. And because of that, a lot of lava comes up and forms these big volcanoes. And so you can see 3 of them in this photo on the left and 1 of them on the right. But they're really gorgeous mountains. And it really gave me a very positive experience of leaving Indonesia, even though I didn't get to stay as long as I wanted to.
Wow, I really love the contrast between your experience with the orangutans and then your visit to the temple, because I feel like they both sound so moving, but in such different ways.
Yeah, thank you. It was an incredible trip. It was one of my favorites that I've ever been on, and I really do hope that the orangutans are recovering, especially with all of this time that the parks are closed. And I hope that you guys will all be inspired to want to go see them yourself someday.
Awesome. Colin, what advice would you have for someone who would love to make travel part of their career the way you have?
I would say the best way to do it is to just feed any of your curiosity that you have about the world. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do. And read books, learn, look at maps, and look at, if you want to make it your career eventually, you can just go ultimately. What I did when I became involved in the travel industry was I saved up for a while and I bought a one-way ticket to the Philippines. I managed to get a job as a editor of a travel magazine. I wrote a lot and I studied creative writing in college. And I got this job at the magazine. And even though magazine work doesn't pay very much in the Philippines, everything is very affordable. So I was able to stretch that out until I built up a little bit more of a portfolio, a little bit more experience. From there, I started earning a little bit more money and could afford to visit some other countries. And after 4 years of that, I came back to New York, having been to, I think, 40 countries or so. And I was able to get a job at Indonesia. They liked the fact that I had been to so many places, and I learned all the other skills I needed on the job. And I've been traveling still ever since.
That's awesome. What a great story. I know lots of people would like to make exploration and discovering of new places a part of their job, and you're such a good example to follow on how it's possible. There's some interest in the chat in sort of the history of the temple that you visited, and I'm wondering what, if anything, you learned or felt. It sounds like the temple was at one point sort of abandoned and overgrown, and was quote unquote rediscovered a couple
Yeah.
hundred years later.
Yeah. So the temple was built in around 1100 AD, so over almost 1,000 years ago, and it was eventually buried. The jungle grew over it. There was volcanic ash that covered it, and it was just lost. And eventually, it was rediscovered by a Dutchman, I believe, in around 1800 something. I'm not sure. But it's a really amazing story, and they ended up, putting it back, cleaning it up, and ever since then they've done several renovations to it just to keep it up to date and safe. In, I believe, the 90s, they actually took it apart brick by brick, and there's millions of bricks, cataloged, numbered every single one, took the whole thing apart, built more secure foundations for it, built a water drainage system so that it wouldn't rot from the inside, and then put every single brick back, and got it all perfectly. And so it's the same exact temple, but now it's going to last a lot longer.
That is amazing. What a great sort of uplifting takeaway too, that any of the students who are inspired by what you're telling them today and sharing with them today, the temple is set up to be there in 10, 20 years when they're ready to visit and experience
Been there
it
for
themselves.
1,000, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably going to last
Been there
another
for
10 or
another
20.
1,000.
Awesome. Well, we have just a couple minutes left and kind of a shy audience today in terms of asking questions in the chat, but I've really enjoyed hearing about your experiences. It sounds like you could have spent months and months and months there exploring all that Indonesia has to offer. I feel like the two experiences you highlighted today are really incredible, absolutely incredible. And if we get more comments as people read and see more about what you did in Indonesia, we'll be sure to pass them along.
Yeah, sounds great.
One of the ways we like to finish our show and tell segments is by asking where you're going to go next as soon as you're freed from your apartment and free to roam the world again. You're sort of in a unique position as someone who's seen a lot of places. So where does the guy who's seen a lot of places want to go next?
I'm actually thinking I'm going to do something in America next. When all this is done, I'm realizing how little I've seen of my own backyard. And so I think I'm going to try to go out west and see some of those national parks out there that are meant to be so amazing, like the Grand Canyon or Zion, any of those places in Utah. I think that's going to be a really cool trip next.
Very cool. Yeah, you're not the first person who said that. That's an interesting sort of phenomenon as part of this, that people are rediscovering some places that are a little closer to home, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool side effect. All right. Well, that's about as much time as we have today. I really want to thank you, Colin, for spending 30 minutes with us and sharing your adventures in Indonesia. And thank you to our entire YouTube live stream audience for joining us today. Hope any and all of you will join us again for one of several exciting Reach the World live stream events that we have left to go this week and in the weeks to come. We have a really full, amazing list of upcoming events at athome.reachtheworld.org. So until then, thank you again, Colin, and we'll see you all next time.
Great. It's so good talking to you. Thank you so much.